Today I'm going to show you 5 easy, quick, simple and effective steps that you can use to turn your bland DJI Mini 2 footage into something that looks absolutely incredible using Premiere Pro. Let's jump right in. So before I show you these 5 quick, simple and easy steps that you can use to turn your boring and ordinary DJI Mini 2 footage into something that looks absolutely incredible and something from a far more expensive drone, something incredibly cinematic, I just want to say 98.5% of you guys watching aren't subscribed. So if you're new around here and love videos about all things drones, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and please make sure that the notification bell's on. And if you learned something new, please make sure to hit that like button too. It means a lot to me and it means a lot to this channel. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let me walk you through these 5 steps using some of my own footage. So 2 quick things just before we jump in and start doing these steps. The first I want to say is I'm using Premiere Pro to color grade this footage, but these steps pretty much translate to any editing software. The principles I'm going to use will be, you'll be able to do them regardless of the software that you're using, but for this I'm going to be using Premiere Pro. And the second thing is, it's important to think ahead whenever you're actually recording your shots in your drone. So because we don't have picture profiles or any log setting within the DJI Mini 2, it's super important that you don't overexpose any areas of your shots. So if you overexpose your sky to the point where it's blown out and all white, unlike any of the higher up drones which have a log setting where you can recover them highlights and pull them back and see your sky and clouds, in the DJI Mini 2 that's absolutely impossible. So if you overexpose any part of your image, you cannot recover it. So it's super important that you don't do that. And actually what I find best is if you slightly underexpose your image. So I like to underexpose to like 0.03, sometimes even 0.07. And I find that you can recover a little bit of them shadows, and it also makes sure that you're never getting caught out by accidentally overexposing any part of the image. So those are the 2 things just to keep in mind whenever you're out shooting with your drone. So this is the first shot I'm going to be color grading and using these 5 simple steps to make look amazing. I took this shot round an area off the north coast of Northern Ireland, incredibly scenic, and I'm really happy with how this shot turned out movement wise and the focal point of what the subject is supposed to be in the video. But I just think it lacks any pop, or we can certainly make this footage look much better. So as you can see, this shot's slightly underexposed, so it's slightly dark. So I have underexposed it as mentioned, just to make sure there's no areas are completely blown out. So let's go through these 5 steps that I use that's going to turn this shot into something amazing. The first is we need to work on the highlights and shadows. So the first thing I do for pretty much all of my shots out of the DJI Mini 2 is I bring up the shadows, and I do this to a point where I'm happy that I'm pulling all the information possible out of the darkest parts of the image. So you can see whenever it's set to 0, there are areas down around the cliffs here where it's just completely black. Whereas when I bring up these shadows, you can actually see, even though it's not a flat picture profile or not a flat video coming out of the drone, that there's actually information in there that is now visible by pulling them shadows up. So I always overdo it with the shadows at this point. Don't worry how the image looks now. We're going to fix that a bit later down the line. The next thing I always do is bring the highlights down, and I just do this to the point where areas like the sky, I'm just pulling back as much as possible, even though that with the DJI Mini 2, like I say, it's not really that possible. But I just pull them down to the point where I'm happy that I've got everything I can out of the highlights. So the second step is to add a curve. So I do this by adding a point in the middle, and then I always pull the shadows down to create the S curve that you always hear about. And you can see this has dramatically changed the image to something which is much better looking. Now this is personal choice or personal preference, but something I always do is I always crush the blacks a little bit by pulling up in the bottom left. And I always crush the highlights just a little bit too by pulling down in the top right. Now that's adding a little bit of a fade to the blacks and a little bit of fades to the whites or the shadows and highlights. That's a personal preference. You don't need to do that, but I find it just adds something a little bit more cinematic to the image. The next step and the third step is we want to bring up the saturation, and we want to bring it up quite a lot. So I find with the DJI Mini 2, especially if the image is underexposed, it really responds well to quite a large increase in saturation. So I always bring the saturation up to probably quite an extreme level, but I find it really helps the image. I never touch the vibrance. I find that the vibrance just adds something a little bit too over the top to the image. So I always just increase the saturation. So just looking at this image, something that I want to do now that the saturation is up is I want to just change the temperature just a little bit. I actually think it's slightly too warm. So I'm going to pull the temperature down a bit just to make it look more like how it looked to the eye when I was there flying the drone. So the fourth step is to apply a LUT. Now I found that the DJI Mini 2 footage actually can respond really well to LUTs. This is going to be very personal preference. You know, LUTs are highly individualized towards each individual person. And what I find is best is if you just start downloading LUTs. You know, if there's a YouTuber giving out a free LUT, download it. If you're on a forum and someone's giving out a free LUT, download it. Even if you want to spend a little bit of money, buy some LUT packs and have a bank of LUTs that you can always try a few of them on your shots to find out what works best, because not only are LUTs highly individualized to a person, they can be highly individualized to a shot. So I find if you have a bank of LUTs that you can just always then try out a couple of them on each piece of footage and find what you like best. So I have a LUT here that I really like, so I'm going to apply that now, and you can see this makes a massive improvement to this image overall. But I find intensity wise it's just a little bit too much, and you'll find that with the DJI Mini footage that standard LUTs for log or cine-like footage are just going to be too much with 100% intensity. So I'm going to bring this down a bit just to an area that looks a lot more natural, and I'm actually just going to tweak the saturation and bring it up a little. So I'm really happy with how this shot's turning out now. And now I'm going to tell you the last and final step that just adds that little bit of cinematic touch to your footage, and that's a vignette. So the first thing I do is bring the amount down just to about there. The thing with a vignette is it needs to be really, really subtle. It's, you know, if it's like that, it's just too much. So it needs to be really subtle. I always bring down the midpoint just a little bit, and then I always feather the vignette quite a lot. And this is my finished shot. So you can see I've used these 5 steps to make this shot way better looking than how it was straight out of the camera with the DJI Mini 2. So these are the 5 steps I always do to make my DJI Mini 2 footage pop. And here is a little bonus tip that's not related to color grading, but if you're going for cinematic footage and really want it to stand out from the crowd, something I like to do is add sound effects, or something I find really important with the footage is to add sound effects. So for example, here's this piece of footage with the sound just from the DJI drone, which is obviously none because it doesn't have a mic. And here is the footage after I've added some sound effects specific to the footage. So I've added waves crashing, and I've added seagulls flying about, because you can see them flying about in the piece of footage. And now look at just how much more cinematic this shot feels with the sound effects. So that's my 5 steps using some simple color grading methods that you can use to make your DJI Mini footage pop. If you've liked this video and you've learned something new, please make sure to hit the like button. And I just want to quickly say before you go, 98.5% of you aren't subscribed to my channel. So if you like all things drone related and drone related videos, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, and please make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my other videos. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.